people who know a lot, and the people who don't know nothing. How did you come to find out what tongue tie is?
So my very, very first ever introduction to it was actually when I became pregnant. I looked up like the common things to be aware of with your baby. And one of the big things that came up was a tongue tie, because it often leads to painful breastfeeding, which leads to women not continuing breastfeeding past like a certain amount of weeks. It's just too painful, or they give up altogether.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't really know that it could do anything past that. And so when my baby was born, I asked the doctors, please check for his tongue, make sure he doesn't have a tongue tie. And they said, he's latching, he's gaining weight, so he's fine. And I remember even one of my doctors saying, yeah, it looks a little bit tight there, but again, he's eating and gaining weight, so I don't have a problem. And I would tell them, okay, but breastfeeding has been extremely painful. And they just told me, like, that's how it is.
Mm.
Yeah, even when I went to speak to people who were professionals in actual breastfeeding and latching and everything, they told me that there would be some pain. But for me, like, it was so bad. And I hear that it's bad for some women for a little bit, and then it gets better. For me, it was bad for months. I would just sob every time I knew the baby needed to eat. I would just start sobbing. My husband would come and like hold my hand while I breastfed. It was really bad. And I just was told that that's how it is, that there's nothing else to be done for it. So that eventually the pain faded and we moved on with life. I kept breastfeeding it. The pain was what it was, and eventually it got less and less and less until I could stand it all together, and then it didn't hurt.
And that's a span of what, months, years, like a year? Or?
That was the span of birth till about 5-ish months.
Okay.
After about that point, it roughly stopped hurting as much, and I could just calmly breastfeed. It was no longer painful. And then after that we had you guys visit, and I remember you pointed out, why is he spitting up all his food? And I had studied the different milestones for children, and I knew that at first there would be some amount of tasting and spitting, or tasting and just kind of, so I expected some amount of that. So when you pointed it out, I said, oh yeah, I know, that's the stage he's at. And I moved on. I thought that was fine. I mentioned it to the doctor, and they said, yeah, that's normal. So we didn't think twice about it.
It's not that he was spitting out food. It's like I'd never seen him swallow. He'd hold the thing in his mouth until it dissolved, and if he's ready to eat another bite, that first bite has to come out.
Yep.
So in the days that I was there, I've never seen him actually swallow anything. Yeah, and 5 months old, I'm like, okay, something.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, and that's what my husband was saying. This is a little bit weird, but the doctor, again, she said he's gaining weight. It seems fine. Okay. So I said, okay, I guess that's it. At this point, I no longer thought about the tongue tie.
Okay.
It was a billion miles away. It was like past life. Never thought about it again. And so we moved on, and I just took it in stride. If this is how he's eating and interacting with food, then so be it. So we would just kind of have a towel or a little vegetable bin. We'd clean everything up as he was eating. And I just assumed that's what it was. It was kind of a pain when we went to a restaurant because there's food everywhere. And I thought, well, everybody goes through this phase. But I had my sister would tell me, like, that's a little bit weird. Check his tongue tie. She even mentioned it to me back then. And I told her that's not it. The doctor said he's fine. He wouldn't have, we wouldn't be an issue now.
Yeah, because your sister has 2 kids around,
Yeah.
Your kids by the time, age, so
yeah. By the time she had her second, our second and my first were lined up. So again, we moved on, and then we came here, and by the time we got here, when we were leaving Minnesota, which was, like within the last 6 months, from that point till now, like a little before we left to now, I had noticed that he started getting a cavity. And I told my husband, oh my God, I think it's a cavity. At first, I thought it was just like something stuck on his tooth, and I would scrape it off and it was fine. And then a few days later, it'd be back. And so I started cleaning it, and I would notice that, oh no, it's like a divot, like the tooth would be flat and they would divot in and out.
Yeah.
And so I knew like his enamel is being eroded. And I told my husband that, and we visited a dentist when we visited Texas, and she told us for the first year of life, he's fine. And by that point, he was barely a year old. So they told us, like, don't worry about brushing his teeth. It's fine for now. But he had that divot, and I was really scared of it. But, no one really paid attention to me, and everyone just sort of was like, it's fine, it's fine. And so I kind of left it. I just left it alone. Right before we moved, my husband was telling me, ooh, maybe, it's been this long, like maybe we should get it checked out. But again, he was telling me it's not a cavity. And I kept telling him, it is. It's bigger. The hole is deeper. It's a cavity. And he was like, no, it's not. And I think it's just because he doesn't want to think that his little baby had a cavity.
Yeah.
So we came here, and finally the divot, like the hole, it's not a hole, but the divot in his tooth is big enough and noticeable enough that my husband was getting scared. And he was like, we got to try to brush his teeth. But he hated it. I tried everything in the book. He hated it. And it's not just like whining or crying. Like right now, I use the method you told me, and he'll just kind of whine while I do it, but it takes a few seconds and we're done. I don't pin him down, nothing. I just hold his head and then we're done. But this was him like sobbing, like uncontrollable, screaming, sobbing. Like it would take him 20 minutes to recover, where he would like, that sort of, severe. And I couldn't do it.
You can't do that twice a day.
No, by the end of it, like he was so tired, he would fall asleep. Like I was emotionally drained. It was not working. So when we went to the dentist, we said, okay, the cavity is bad enough. I can't brush it. Like it's not working. We have to go to a professional. And we already knew, like, we're getting a little bit more settled. Let's start getting all of our medical stuff underway. So we went to the doctor. This particular doctor was picked out by one of my husband's co-residents, or one of his resident friends at the hospital. And I asked him, I said, hey, I know you guys, money was tight before you got your current job. Do you have any good dentists you went to before that? And he said, oh yeah, we have a low-cost dentist who was really good. And that was this doctor. So they sent us to this dentist, and we went in specifically because of the cavity. That's why we went. We went in because of the cavity. The dentist, she had us hold him, like Bubby was facing me, and I would lean him down. And then she would be on the other side in front of us holding a pillow. And it was kind of terrible. I would my husband and me would hold his arms, and she would open his mouth and quickly check in and then let go. So she tried to make it as quickly as possible. She's a fantastic doctor. Now she gets up and she says, yeah, I think it's a cavity. And we start talking about it. She says, oh yeah, by the way, do you know he's got a really severe tongue tie?
Severe?
Yeah, she said severe tongue tie. And I looked at her and I said, my husband said, tongue tie? What do you mean a tongue tie? And she says, yeah, it's kind of the worst I've seen for some time. And she said, it's essentially his whole tongue. And I can send you the photos. She sent us a before, and we have an after.
Okay, please.
Yeah. So when you imagine the mouth, his tongue would be here, and he would be able to lift maybe this much, like just the very tippy top of the tongue. Whereas you're supposed to be able to go like this.
Yeah.
And we told her, he's not speaking as much as we would expect. And he was, then the issue with eating. And, and she told us, she said, his jaw seems fine, but if you don't catch this over time, the jaw will be, she's called it recessed. It would not be as well developed. And so she told us, she even said, I would venture to think the cavity would be because food and milk is just piling in his mouth. And
you can swallow correctly, it's just pooling here.
It would just pool. And that always happened. I thought it was just like something he did where he would breastfeed, and when he unlatched, just a bunch of milk would fall. And I thought that was normal, but she said that no, your baby's supposed to eat it.
Swallow it all.
Yeah. So she said, usually I only do the tongue tie operation on kids who are a year and younger. And she said, after that, it can be kind of hard for them to do the actual operation and recover.
How old was he at that? How old was
he? Was like
15 months?
He was like 16, 15 months. So she told me this is right at the cusp. And she said,
Yeah.
it's kind of a little bit too old. And she said, and my husband said, what would you do? And she said, if it were my baby, I would do it. And she said, he's close enough. He's close enough to
Yeah.
a year that we can do it. It'll be kind of uncomfy, but we can do it.
Yeah.
And she said, every Friday and every Monday, my whole day is just booked with parents bringing in their babies for tongue tie releases.
You're kidding me.
Nope. That's why we asked her, we were like, how do you know? And she's like, this is what I do most of the week. It's just appointments, literally booked all day
Okay.
for
Okay.
these 2 days of the week, every week, to release tongue ties. And she said, it's very, very prevalent. And she said that a lot of patients will not be aware if the baby has a tongue tie or not, but they'll have doctors who recommend go to a specialist and see. And she said that 9 times out of 10, there is. And she's very, very reluctant to do anything if it isn't needed. So she said, I'm not over here like releasing minor tongue ties. We're talking about full-blown tongue ties that I'm fixing every single week.
Wow.
And so the way so once we spoke with her, you know, I right away, like the minute she started talking about the tongue tie, I started crying. My husband is listening and he's saying, okay, can we do this today? And she said, yeah, this is usually not when I would do it, but you guys are already here. Your baby's already like, you know, kind of uncomfortable. Like, let's just get it done.
Yeah.
And so we did it. We said, okay, yeah, let's do it. So she said, and she says, I don't allow the parents to come back there with me. I go to a separate room that I have for operations. I don't let parents to come. And she looked at my husband. She said, you're a doctor. So if you want to come, I'll allow it. But she looked at me. She was like, but you're not coming.
You're already
I'm
sobbing.
already crying.
Not you.
I'm already in the chair behind like this, like sobbing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I said, okay. And my husband, you know, he didn't say, okay, I'll come with you. I looked at him and I said, you go with him.
Yeah.
Don't let him be out of your sight. He's never been out of my sight in a hospital, except for when they did his except for one,
what is it called? Circumcision.
Yes, except for the circumcision. That's the only time he was away from us. And even then, I sent them with a bottle of my milk. So we at least had that. Because they were like, we give him sugar water. And I was like, you're going to give him my milk.
Yeah.
So I gave him milk. But anyway, so I told my husband, you go. And he was like, okay. So he went. What they do is that they take the baby and they swaddle them. So the baby gets swaddled, which is kind of scary when you're as old as Blubby, because he was able to be aware of like moving his arms, which is why for an infant, it's easier because swaddling is a comfort. But when you're, you know, a year and a half, it's kind of scary having your arms pinned down like that. But they swaddle the baby, they put them down on a chair, because my husband described it to me later, and they put the head back and basically they hold the mouth open, they pull the tongue up, and with a laser, they laser that area open so that the actual tongue tie skin gets pushed open basically.
Yeah.
And it forms basically a diamond. So when you open his mouth, you see a little diamond shape.
Yeah.
That diamond shape gets covered with a yellow film that is essentially a scab.
Okay.
So the scab needs to be stretched. So basically, like if this is the opening of the tongue and here would be the scab, you have to go like this and stretch it every 4 hours, or use the whole, both of your fingers and pull back everything. But I thought that the one finger was easier because it meant I didn't have to pin him on the floor.
Okay.
I would just hold the back of his head and like, I would wait till he was distracted and I would just come up and leave.
Okay.
He would still cry really hard, but at least it wasn't like a prolonged thing. It was fast. So I just made sure to have my hands very clean and I would do that. So you have to do it every 4 hours. Otherwise, that area, because it's mostly shut, you know, think about your mouth during the day.
It's going to heal back. Yeah, it's going to heal back.
Right. So they said that when it heals, you always lose some amount of length because, you know, it's a healing process. If the skin is trying to close. So you always lose some amount, but the idea is that it's way better, and it is way better. So I was doing that, and we noticed immediately when after she did the process, she said that once they do the laser, they hold the tongue up for 10 minutes. She said that's the hardest part. The actual lasering takes seconds, but then they have to hold him in place and hold his tongue for 10 minutes.
While he's screaming.
While he's screaming and sobbing. He doesn't have either of his parents there with him. He's in a room with strangers with lights in his face. Like, it's just a very scary experience. which is why, again, it's usually done on like newborns,
Okay.
where it's just sort of,
his dad was with him, but you said what he was watching from outside.
yes, they had him like at the door and not in there, because she said that usually kids cry harder and longer when they see the parents.
Yeah.
So she said, so Blubby didn't know that his dad was watching. So at this point, I'm in the room like full on sobbing. A nurse came in and she was like, "Are you okay?" She talked to me and she told me about her son who had a tongue tie, but they never caught it. So she's saying, my son is 15 and struggling with like speech impediments and all sorts of things having to do with the tongue tie that we never caught. And she said that it can still be done on adults, but it wouldn't have the same effect. You know, a lot of like emotional scarring and physical scarring that happens as you're growing up and having these speech impediments is already there. Even if they fix it, it's there. So she told me, you know, like it could be worse. I'm glad you caught it. So, you know, I spoke with her about that. And then they came in. When they came in, Blubby was already a little bit calm. And then he saw me and he busted out crying all over again.
Yes.
I took him, I breastfed him, and immediately I noticed the latch was strong, like further back in his mouth, and it kind of hurt a little bit, almost like I was relatching for the first time. But it wasn't a strong pain or anything, and it faded quickly. But I noticed that, like she told me right away, she said, you may notice a different type of latching. A lot of moms describe like feeling more tongue on the nipple itself, which I did. And so she told us for the first 24 hours, leave it alone. After that, you're going to start the 4-hour stretch every 4 hours. And then she said at night, do it once a night if you notice in the morning that the area is tight. I never did. So at night, I left him alone, and I would do it first thing in the morning, and I would do it right before we would sleep. So that day when we came home, we gave him food, and he ate. Didn't spit the food. And I was like, oh my God, he's supposed to be spitting food everywhere. So cool. So he ate the food. He would eat it and just swallow it. And since then, he's chunked up. He's like put on a little bit of muscle and bone, and he's chunked up a bit.
And you said he was, when he would say no, he would like shake his head before, which, you know, to tell you no. And you said that same day,
I told him, I said, baby, I got to change your diaper. And he looked at me and said, no. And he ran off. I was like, oh. He spoke to me. And it had stuff like, we went upstairs and he has a little stuffed animal we call Tuto. And he came and he said, Tuto. And I was like,
okay, now has he said words before then?
Nope. The most we could get out of him was Dada. That's the most you could get. And that took him a long time to do. Like he would struggle with it. But even before then, I would tell him, you know, I would tell him like, Tuto, and he would stop. He would look at my mouth. He would mimic with his mouth. But then when he tried to use his voice, it wouldn't work. Like, okay. He would have times where he would do that, and then he would cry and get angry and kick and scream. And I couldn't understand what was happening, and he couldn't tell me anything. But looking back, I think he was just trying so hard, and he knew what to say, but his tongue wouldn't do it. And he was no way to tell us, and I had no way to know. So it was just, looking back, so heartbreaking to know that all this time my baby could have been talking and trying to talk and just couldn't. Breaks my heart. Yeah, but that day he said no, he said tuto, he said cat. He, like, that day, since then he says cat, he says dog, he says woof woof, he says meow. Language explosion that you usually see at 3, we're witnessing now. At a year and a half. Okay. And his tongue tie, by the way, today's the last tongue tie stretch day. It's totally healed now. Oh, we're done.
Okay.
And
okay, so how long has it been since the surgery?
2 weeks, 3 weeks.
3 weeks now.
Yeah, you're supposed to do it she says it heals within 2 weeks, but you want to do an extra week of stretching just to be sure. And that way, if he's delayed at all in healing, you got it covered anyway. So we're good. Like, I'm going to do one final stretch before bed tonight, but even that I think is just like me being cautious, because she told me, you know, usually you don't even need to go up to the 3 weeks. Okay. But I told her I'm going to be careful. But yeah, we had that language explosion. And since then, that's what we've had, where he says shirt, where he points his shirt. I say, yeah, baby, shirt. A few days ago, like 2 days ago, he learned agua, which again requires that requires the tongue to go up. Agua. He's been so excited. Every time I give him water, he sticks his finger. Agua. I say, yeah, baby. So
Wow.
it's just
Like, so because I remember when you called me when you first found out, it just broke my heart. And it's nice to, I don't know, it feels like it's been longer than 3 weeks, but that it has a happy ending, that you caught it early now, not 2 years from now, not 12 years from now. And the funny thing is that, all the people you specifically asking for the specific thing, and professionals tell you, don't worry about it, don't worry about it.
Yeah, there's a big notion of like just dismissing people. I think mothers especially because after my delivery, I didn't have postpartum depression. I just had a lot of anxiety. I was very worried. I didn't want to let him out of my sight. Like, it got so bad that when I would go into the clinic, the nurses would see me and I didn't want to talk to anybody. I would tell my husband, like, tell them, and he would talk for me. And they kind of, I feel like some of them got worried that I was maybe a battered woman, because then they would bring in other professionals and I would just be holding my baby like this, like, I didn't want my husband was so careful. He was so gentle. He'd be like, okay, sweetie, okay. And I'd be like, tell them what we talked about. I didn't want to talk to them. I didn't want them to touch my baby. I didn't want to touch me. Like, because after delivery, there was a suspected, like, for me, they were suspecting that I may have had like intrauteral infection, which means that the day after I delivered, I went in and a doctor stuck like her entire hand in my vagina and poked my uterus to see if I had any infection. And she said that if I did, the way they know is by how painful it is, not if, how.
Okay.
So for me, like, I just delivered a baby last night. Today, the nurse is like, the doctor's like wiggling around in my vaginal canal. And she said, oh, you didn't kick me in the face, so you don't have an infection. But I'm sitting there sobbing. Literally, I'm holding on to, my husband has a baby over there. I'm holding on to a nurse in her, like, my face is on her chest and I'm just sobbing while they're doing this. And she got out and like, she finished and she was like, okay, so I don't think you have an infection. We can do a swab. And I was like, please just stop. Like, it was so dramatic. I shake just thinking about it. So that was what happened after my delivery. And so I was really like, I don't want to go to the hospital. I don't want to be touched. Don't look at my baby. I don't want my baby away from me. Like, I get like tear up just thinking about it. It was so bad. And so after that, then I'm like, please, I would be like, please look at my baby. Like, make sure his tongue is okay. So of course you're gonna be like, oh, you poor woman, you're fine. Like, no one was really paying attention to me because of how I looked. And my husband's a med student, and he was saying like, oh, well, the baby looks okay, but please check. And they would be like, oh, med students, you're always worried more than you need to be because you're studying everything. Don't worry about it. So we were just dismissed. And I would say by some genuinely good, nice doctors who later were fantastic doctors for us, but they just didn't listen at that point.
Okay.
But since then, Blubby has changed a lot. Our experience is very, very different. And this doctor told us, the dentist, she said, tongue tie and what it does is very new. We know that it can happen. We know to look for it. But in med school, because my husband felt so ashamed, he said, how could I have let this happen to my son? I should know better. I should have looked. I just got done with my medical training. What was I doing? And the doctor said, please don't blame yourself. Don't feel bad. What you're taught in school, what she was taught until she specialized, was if the baby is latching and feeding and gaining weight, he's fine. But she said that it's important for them to just swipe under the roof. And then she said, if you're touching the base of the baby's mouth and it gets caught on anything, that's a tongue tie and it should be addressed. Because doctors only deal with what happens right after birth and in those couple of months. But she said that she then gets the kids after, when they come in and they have speech impediments or underdeveloped jaw, or they can't say certain words for like specific areas, or trouble eating, or babies who are underweight. Like, she said that she had one baby who, he was so underweight that they put in a tube. They tried to put in a tube in his stomach. they nearly did it when the mom said, wait, before, like that day they were going to do the surgery, the mom canceled it. And she said, let me make sure he doesn't have a tongue tie. And she went in and the baby had a tongue tie. They released it, the baby gained weight within a week.
Wow.
Like she was saying that there's a lot that isn't really looked at because it's not information that's really widely known in the medical world as far as like training doctors goes. So she says that stuff, like even I'll show you some photos of Blubby that day. I took a photo of him smiling and my husband says, you know, he looks more like your father, like his jaw kind of moved forward a little bit.
Yeah.
He looks a lot like my dad now.
Wow.
And everyone tells me that. The doctor just said the best advice you can give a mom she said, even if you don't think your kid has a tongue tie, just go to a pediatric dentist because they're specialized. They can check.